Now, were you looking for more?
No, that's fine. I simply wanted to begin where the phrase, as it were, officially occurs. Right. And I think that's where it officially occurs.
It is indeed.
And then move on from there to places in your thinking where it seems to me the same idea is operative, though so far as I know you haven't actually brought that phrase or phrases to the same effect into play in expressing these other thoughts. The next thing that I thought of, it's really very close, I think, to what you're doing in mental events with the idea of rationality, is your argument in such papers as on the very idea of a conceptual scheme. What I'm thinking of is the argument against the idea that we can so much as make sense of the idea of a way of thinking that's a way of thinking, all right, only it's inaccessible to us. There's no way we can fathom what's going on there. It seems to me that that thought could be put in terms of the idea of rationality as playing a constitutive role in fixing for us the very idea of having a way of thinking, the very idea of having a worldview, say. That's governed by the constitutive ideal of rationality. And then some thought like this, suppose we allow ourselves to talk in terms of conceptual schemes for purposes of making it go away, which is what you do. We're going to want to say something like a conceptual scheme is a substantive conception of what rationality requires. It's a substantive conception of what's a reason for what. And now, the distinctively Davidsonian thought, the idea of a substantive conception of what's a reason for what is an idea that we can deploy only, as it were, from where we are. So we have our substantive conception of what's a reason for what. And then we can recognize the other fellow as having a substantive conception of what's a reason for what, only if the other fellow's substantive conception is pretty much ours. I mean, give or take, it can vary around the edges. I mean, his can be archaic or primitive or advanced or something like that. Mm-hmm. I'd like to put that thought. I mean, the thought that's skeptical about, at any rate, pluralities of conceptual schemes, by saying the constitutive ideal of rationality, that's a substantive ideal, and the only substance that we can give it is the substance that we find that we and our ancestors have given it. So here we are knowing what's a reason for what, and we can't recognize anybody else as so much as having a view about that unless the view is sufficiently close to the one that we think we know to be correct. Does that sound all right? I mean, you don't think it's perverse to haul the phrase constitutive ideal of rationality over into being a way of formulating that thought of yours? I mean, I hope I didn't skew the thought too far.
I like it.
Great. Okay, well, that's monosyllabic answers are fine. But the next terrain, I think it does get a bit trickier. At some abstract level, it seems to me that it's got to be right to say something like this. This idea of rationality playing a constitutive role has to be seen retrospectively as having been operative in your writings about semantic interpretation, many of which were before.
Yeah, quite right.
The phrase actually showed up on the scene, which it did in mental events.
Right, but the principle of charity really.
That is it, right.
it.
So interpretation of linguistic behavior of others, that's going to be, that's going to be a case of making sense of others as persons, so that it's going to come within the scope of the thought that you express in mental events. That we can't see ourselves as doing that, making sense of someone as a person, while taking ourselves to be at liberty, not to bother with finding this person.
This goes not just for understanding what they say, but what they believe, what they intend, and in fact understanding their actions as actions.
So you're happy, I mean, this is at the abstract level, you're happy with the idea that the kind of semantical theory of the linguistic repertoire of, to begin with, it was other groups, and then it became other individuals when you started to be skeptical about the idea of shared languages.
Right.
But there's a generic idea, semantic interpretation of the linguistic behavior of others. That's just a case of making sense of others.
Yes.
So a semantic theory is going to be in there with propositional attitude talk. Its conceptual apparatus, the conceptual apparatus of the semantical theory, is going to be unintelligible except against the background of knowing what's a reason for what, a substantive conception of rationality.
All right. I mean, now I begin to be uncertain where this is tending.
Well, yeah, I mean it to be tending.
Sure.
Let me let it tend.
Well, let me put it this way. The exact way in which you put that, I may have to say later, I think is tendentious.
I actually meant it to be.
Yes, I thought you did.
I meant it to be a possibly tendentious way of putting something that is clearly Davidsonian. Let me start in a kind of mild way with a puzzle that I've long had about something that you used to say, and I think still say, about the procedure of radical interpretation. You said things like this, that we can know that the target of our interpretation holds a certain sentence true, and then we can, if we know that, we can find out in what circumstances she holds this sentence true, and we can know all that before we have our interpretation going, so that's a kind of entering wedge into the construction of an interpretation.
Well, I'll just wait until you ask me a question.
That was meant to be a formulation of things that I think you have said, that it's puzzled me that you said, as opposed to, here's what it seems to me that you should say, in line with the generally plainly Davidsonian thought that interpretation is making sense of others, and this is part of crediting them with propositional attitudes in a holistically interconnected way, governed by the constitutive ideal of rationality. I think this actually goes back to something that Quine used to say about assent, and then rightly decided that he shouldn't